Hello and welcome back to the Movie Memo Recaps. Today we are going to recap a 2012 movie titled Contraband. Please be advised that there will be spoilers ahead. The film opens with a helicopter circling the skies, notifying numerous officers on boats to check a vessel near the dock. Andy notices this and wakes up his friend Walter, yelling at him to retrieve the items. Andy grabs the duffel bag containing the drugs and throws it overboard as the cops approach him. In New Orleans, Chris Faraday is attending a wedding for his dear friend, Danny. Later at the wedding, we meet Chris's wife, Kate, and another acquaintance, Sebastian. The team discusses Chris's background and how he was the top smuggler in all of New Orleans. When Chris goes to reload, a man named Church approaches him and asks how he's doing. He continues by inquiring about Chris's work and current activities. Chris informs him that he has a firm that installs security alarms and lives a quiet life. Chris's father appears to be in prison, carrying out the same smuggling enterprise as his son, and Church is working with him. Church offers Chris a way back into that world if he ever wants to. The scene then switches to Andy and Walter driving into the dead of night. They're on their way to tell their boss they lost the drugs, knowing escape would worsen their situation. An automobile soon approaches the couple, and the boss, Tim Briggs, inquires as to what happened to his supplies. After hearing what transpired, Tim walks back to his car, leaving Andy to feel he has avoided a hazardous scenario. Tim ruthlessly runs into Andy's automobile. Later, Kate receives a call informing her that her brother Andy is in difficulty. The trio rushes to the hospital, where they discover Andy in bed and Walter in surgery. Chris inquires, and Andy succinctly informs him that he had to relinquish 10 pounds of coke owing to a check by the customs. He apologizes to his sister, and Chris consults with his man, Sebastian, about doing some reconnaissance on Tim Briggs. On the way home, Chris informs Kate that he will handle her brother's problem, and the two leave to pick up their children from the babysitter. Chris responds to a client's call the next day. Sebastian tells him all about Briggs, including his release from prison a few months ago and his hangout spot. Chris instantly gets onto the road and heads to the hangout. After walking inside, he approaches Briggs, who recognizes Chris. Chris and Briggs's brother appear to have worked together in the past, and Chris is planning something to prevent him from killing Andy. Briggs demands $700,000, the full cost of the drugs he lost, and Chris advises him to be reasonable. The man is unconcerned about Chris's reputation, so Chris walks away. He approaches Andy and sees him packing his stuff. He reveals that Briggs paid Walter a visit last night and killed him. Chris lectures Andy and ensures that he realizes that he has no one to tell him what is good and bad, but Andy is a pathetic imbecile who chose this life. Chris grabs his weapon and heads to Briggs' house. He is welcomed with a rude tone, and Chris informs him that he needs 1 month to repay him, but he is granted 2 weeks and threatens his family if he does not pay. This sparks a short argument between the two, and Chris warns Briggs not to mention his wife or children again. Briggs's daughter notices this, and everything calms down. Later on, Chris observes various boats from a distance, as it is the only method he knows how to earn that kind of money. He goes to his wife and informs her, somewhat awkwardly, that he must return to the smuggling game. His wife is not pleased to hear this, but there are no other options. Chris talks with his father and expresses a desire to return to the game. His father claims that the finest day of his life was when Chris got clean and started a proper business, but he recognizes the necessity for it and assigns his son a place on the cargo ship he used to smuggle stuff in through. Chris goes and informs Sebastian of the idea, but he refuses to smuggle drugs, despite the fact that it provides the highest profit margin. Instead, he would acquire $15 million in counterfeit from Panama and smuggle it into the United States. Chris requests to see the crew manifest and searches through the names to locate a crew. Chris phones his buddy in Panama City to inform him that he is on his way to pick up a large consignment of cash. That night, he arrives at the dock with his family. He hugs everyone before boarding the enormous cargo ship. The crew begins to arrive aboard the ship, and Andy and Chris both set down their luggage. The ship sets off, and the duo hides some duffel bags inside the wall before heading to greet the crew. The captain, passing by the camp, notices Chris and alerts his troops on Chris's notorious past. He promptly demotes him and instructs his troops to monitor him closely. Later, Chris wakes up after a power sleep and returns to work cleaning rugs, but in the interim, he steals a map from the drawer that the captain does not see. With that, he gets a welder and begins working on a wall. He ultimately makes his way up to meet his group, who will help him smuggle the money in. He instructs them not to involve the captain, and they follow him below, where he shows them a big hole in the wall where he intends to put the money. The second in command walks down towards them, forcing them to leave Andy inside and close the entrance. After checking around, he sees nothing strange and exits the workshop. Chris then explains the strategy to the crew. He plans to drive, collect the cash, and return to the ship during rush hour. Tarek does not believe there is enough time, so Olaf is instructed to create a minor issue with the ship in order to stall and buy them time. Briggs and his men are closely monitoring Chris's family at home. Briggs approaches the main door and tells Kate he wants to play. His other men burst into the house, wreaking havoc while Kate remains pinned. One of the thugs unintentionally discharges a bullet, and Briggs orders his men to retreat. At the Panama Canal, the ship is almost ready to dock, but Chris helps sabotage it. His concerned wife invites him to the deck to take a phone call. He instructs her to phone Sebastian, who arrives at the family's location right away. The captain instructs his men to lower speed midway, but Chris's crew mistakenly sabotages the ship too much, and they head for the port at full speed. The skipper is going insane and orders the men to open the anchors. They shut off the engine, and Chris releases the anchors as they spin the ship. They experience a minor collision as the ship comes to a halt. Upon arrival at dock, the captain detects a propeller jam. The skipper claims that someone tampered with it and storms out. Chris, meanwhile, makes his way to the duffel bag he hid in the wall, and the captain is chastised for his irresponsible behavior. Danny, Chris, and Andy then quickly make their way across the city, with Chris making sure his wife and children are safe. They arrive at their destination and pass through a shop to discover Edwin in the back. Chris asks if he got the van and cash, and he responds yes. Edwin displays the uncut fake American dollars, which Chris investigates. He drops iodine on the paper, and as it turns blue, he lashes out at Edwin, accusing him of not printing on starch-free papers. Chris is dissatisfied and wishes for the same outcome as before. He decides to go meet another dealer named Gonzalo, but Edwin says it's a bad idea. With roughly an hour to go, he heads towards the warehouse, but the captain is looking for him all around the ship. At Briggs's residence, he hears a knock and discovers Sebastian. Sebastian enters the house and warns him not to mess with Chris's family. He claims that if he had employed a professional smuggler from the start, the box would have arrived safely. Sebastian appears deceptive, and the focus changes to the trio, who are scared to face Gonzalo. However, Chris promises them that he will handle the situation. When they arrive at the facility, Danny and Chris exit the car, and Andy receives Briggs's message, encouraging him to call him. As the two proceed inside to see the boss, Andy responds to Briggs, who instructs him to take the genuine money and buy drugs from a certain dealer. If he fails to bring the drugs, his sister and her children will be killed. Andy then opens the bag containing the money they have. Inside the building, Gonzalo welcomes his old acquaintance, Chris. As Danny goes to grab the van, Gonzalo informs Chris that he is taking down an armored truck and invites him to join in. Outside, Danny runs to the van but notices Andy is missing. Gonzalo also assures Chris that if he joins, he can get the supernotes for free. Danny then brings the van inside, informing Chris that the money and Andy are missing. Gonzalo and his crew now aim their weapons at Chris, who Gonzalo believes has humiliated him. Chris then questions the authenticity of the offer, notably the supernotes that accompany it. Gonzalo snatches both men's wallets and IDs. Back aboard the ship, the captain contacts Olaf and tells him he has 10 minutes to prepare the ship. Olaf sends this information to Chris, who tells him to stall for as long as possible. Gonzalo instructs Chris and Danny to obstruct the armored vehicle. When they see the incoming vehicle, they attempt to stop it but end up flipping over. Gonzalo's men rush at the truck, blowing it open. Gonzalo kills the 3 guards, and the crew rushes to remove the contents off the truck. Tarek begins paying off a few people to delay their job, hoping to allow Chris enough time to take the supernotes. Gonzalo rips a painting out of its frame, and the cops arrive soon. A shootout ensues, and large reinforcements arrive, slaughtering Gonzalo's troops. Gonzalo kills a couple of cops but has no chance of defeating them. The driver of the truck is hurt. Gonzalo gets into the truck, and Danny and Chris hop on the back. A bullet grazes Gonzalo, starting a chase that lasts until a bus blocks the cops' route. Andy returns to the ship though without Chris and Danny. After evading the cops, Chris puts the painting into his van. As they grab their IDs, Gonzalo asks them to take him to the hospital. They load him into their van as the cops approach the building. As they speed away, Gonzalo dies, and Danny grabs their wallets and throws him out. Captain Camp summons Tarek and orders his troops to search anybody who walks onto the ship. Chris arrives at the dock, and Tarek opens a container for them to drive the van into. But when Tarek closes the container, the crane yanks it up, leaving the doors wide. As Tarek lowers the container, Danny steps forward to seal the doors. Tarek hurries over to the two, who begin offloading the supernotes. Simultaneously, Customs informs Captain Camp that they want him to inspect the cargo that arrived late. The men cart away the supernotes as Captain Camp begins checking the late containers for any irregularities. Tarek and Danny start putting the supernotes into the hole Chris made. Chris, in the meantime, notices Captain Camp and starts doing parkour to get away from them. He escapes as the captain opens the final crate. When they find nothing strange, Chris returns to the room, brutally thrashes Andy, and inquires about the location of his money. When Chris is told that he bought drugs with it and that they are in the roof, he starts tossing them at Andy until he sees the voicemail Briggs threatened him with. Chris relaxes a little and phones Kate to ensure everything is well. He contacts Sebastian and tells him what occurred and that he is discarding the drugs into the sea. Sebastian then receives a visit from Church, who threatens him and gives him a few days. Turns out Sebastian took a loan from Church but he has failed to pay back in time. He lectures him and ensures that his point is clear as he departs. Sebastian goes to Briggs and instructs him to scare Kate so Chris would not throw away his package. Chris begins preparing something in the kitchen with Tarek, and the scene shifts to Kate concluding her work for the day. Briggs, the psychopath, crashes through the glass doors, seizing Kate's head and slamming it against the glass. He threatens her to ensure that her husband delivers his item. Sebastian then pulls up and approaches Briggs, who pretends not to know him before driving away. Sebastian embraces Kate, but she notices a hint of alcohol on him and is outraged that he is driving her children. She tells them to get out of his car, puts them in hers, and drives away. She instantly contacts Chris, and when she says Briggs said not to drop it in the water, he thinks something is amiss, and the phone goes dead. Kate is with a friend who is quite concerned about her, and she says the cops want to speak with her. Kate decides to return to Sebastian's residence to pick their items first. Chris learns from Andy that he obtained the drugs from a man named Ruben, whom he knows well. Kate walks into Sebastian's house, finds him asleep, and packs her belongings. He wakes up and tells her to stay, but she refuses and smacks him, so he chases her and she locks herself in a room. She summons Chris, and Sebastian slams the door open, causing Kate to fall and strike the back of her skull. When Chris calls back, Sebastian realizes he has made a serious mistake. Chris contacts Sebastian's phone and informs him that if he approaches his family, he will die. Revealing that Briggs works for Sebastian and they set Chris up. Sebastian phones Captain Camp and informs him that Chris intends to dump a package. If he ensures that he does not, the captain will receive Chris's part of the earnings. He agrees but warns that if he doesn't give up the location, he'll call in the dogs and have the package seized. With that, the captain goes down to Chris's room and begins searching it. The captain informs Chris that if he does not give the package, Customs and Border Protection will imprison him. Chris goes into the captain's quarters and grabs a few keys. The captain then notifies Customs and Border Protection, escalating the issue. Chris cuts a copy of the captain's keys, and the CBP charges towards the boat. The units deploy, and a large number of police officers are ready to search the ship. Sebastian takes some plastic and wraps Kate's motionless body inside. He covers her up, and the cops board the ship as the crew is gathered in one place. Customs searches the ceiling and promptly discovers an empty hole in the wall. They also check the van but only find a tarp. They interrogate Chris, while Andy exits the boat and obtains the all-clear. Unfortunately, Briggs finds Andy, who escapes swiftly and is easily cornered. During the interrogation, Customs informs Chris that the individual bringing in the container with the van has been deceased for years. Chris has a naive demeanor, making them helpless to intervene or free him. Chris notices Briggs in the automobile, who is holding Andy captive. However, when Briggs does not see his drugs, he closes the glass, which Chris breaks and yanks him from the car. He begins belting the pulp out of him until a thug fires a shot. Briggs puts Chris into the car and shows him where he can get his delivery. He uses the key he made to open a residence, and a silent security alarm alerts authorities to the location. Inside the house, Chris opens the trunk of a car to display a cleaning machine. He disassembles it and begins handing Briggs the drugs. They now know Chris is a master smuggler, so they try out the equipment. Chris uses this distraction to grab a car and drive away, while Captain Camp makes his way downstairs to find Briggs and his men inside. When the cops arrive at the residence, they arrest Briggs and Captain Camp. Chris arrives at his residence and yells for Kate but does not see her. Sebastian has Kate's dead body in his car and intends to dump it. Chris arrives at Sebastian's house and, when no one answers, attempts to break in. Sebastian sits there, hating what he has just done, while Chris notices the broken latch on the door. Sebastian goes to his worksite and plans to hide the body in the concrete. Chris arrives at the worksite as well, and he finds and whacks Sebastian. When he doesn't respond to where Kate is, Chris belts him before walking away to see what Sebastian's guys are up to. As he contacts Kate, he hears a phone ringing near the concrete pouring area. He goes to view a body and quickly frees Kate. Sebastian only observes her motionless body. But, fortunately, Kate was not dead, just unconscious, and Chris calls for an ambulance. Tarek and Danny arrive at a certain place, where Chris is reunited with his wife. Tarek and Danny then start pulling up the supernotes, and they realize why Chris is the best smuggler in the game. Sebastian is arrested, and meets Bud in prison, where Bud gives a group of inmates an approving nod, as they surround Sebastian. His fate is left unknown. Andy retrieves the fake bills, which Chris had dumped into the ocean in order to avoid being caught by U.S. Customs. At a police auction, Andy purchases the van that was used in the escape. Chris meets with Church, who offers him $2.5 million for the fake currency, but Chris demands $3 million. Church agrees to meet Chris's price. In a friendly conversation, Church asks Chris if he knows anything about the painting that was stolen in Panama, telling him that it's worth over $140 million, or $20 million on the black market. As Chris and Andy leave the meeting with Church, the painting is seen in the van, having gone unnoticed by the customs police. Chris tells his buddies that the painting is worth at least $20 million. The film ends with Kate and Chris in a beach house, revealing that they have taken their lives to the next level. Thanks for watching. If you are new, don't forget to subscribe for more of these recaps. Until next time, have a nice day.